I want to go over some of the strategies you may want to consider using in the digital asset space. So keep in mind, this space is very risky. Assume that you will lose money in some of the projects at some time. Plan for it. But let me give you an interesting analogy. I did some math, and if you invested $10,000 into each of 10 different projects, so that's $100,000 total. And again, I just used it because it was a nice round number. But if you invested $100,000 spread across 10 projects, and each of them got what is the average is within this industry per month, and each quarter, every 3 months, one of them just disappeared, took all the money and was gone. If that happened every quarter for a year, at the end of the year, 4 of those 10 would have just disappeared. That 100,000 would now be worth $237,000. So even with 4 of the 6 disappearing completely, that 100,000 becomes 237,000. In other words, there is a lot of risk, but the reward is so high that if you manage it and you plan for it, you can usually do quite well. So as of this recording, I have over 150,000 spread across 20 different projects. It's not final yet, but it looks like in the last few days that one of those 20 is disappearing. I invested 1,000 into that one. I've pulled out 300. So it looks like I'm going to end up losing $700 on that project. With that said, my initial contribution of 40,000 has gained 110,000, and now it has lost 700. So that's a pretty high reward for that little bit of risk. So again, just keeping that in mind for perspective, but assume you will lose money in some of these and just plan for it accordingly. So with that said, let's go into some of the strategies to consider. First of all, think about the big picture. So where do these digital assets fit into the bigger picture of your overall portfolio? Okay, always keep that in mind. My strategy is to use the instant cash flow to fund other opportunities. Okay, so use the cash flow to fund the other opportunities. Sometimes, again, you can do it instantly where you invest the money and you start pulling out the gains right away. And this is for your overall digital asset portfolio. Or you could take your entire portfolio and say, I'm going to compound it first and let it grow, maybe for a specific period of time, such as 6 months, or maybe until it hits a certain amount, such as $100,000. And so you can kind of set a compounding and growth period with a limit at the end. And then once you hit that certain time or that certain amount, then you can convert it to cash flow. Another strategy is to take your overall portfolio and split it so that 75% is coming out for cash flow and the other 25% stays in for compounding. I really like that approach and I tried it for a while, but it required a lot more admin than I would have expected. There were a lot of challenges. It wasn't as easy as just reinvesting 25 and pulling out 75. And the reason is every project has different liquidity provisions, different timing, different minimums. And so that was more challenging than I had anticipated. And so what I'm doing is I've picked a period of time and I've been growing my assets. My period of time was 8 months. And then at the end of the 8 months, I'm converting to a cash flow only. And so I just let mine grow. And now I've converted them and now I'm starting to pull out the cash flow for other things. So just keep in mind, big picture, where does your overall digital asset portfolio fit into your overall net worth, net value? Zeroing in a little bit, what do you invest in? And so which types of projects do you want to participate in? I've now identified more than 200 of these. There's tons of them, and they all have different strategies. And so one strategy you can use is maybe to be the first in. I know a lot of people, they like to be the first one in, and they do it. They want return of their investment as fast as possible. And so a new one comes out, they'll put in their money, maybe it's 2,000, maybe it's 5,000, whatever it is, and start pulling out their gains. And as long as it makes it, depending on the project, 2 to 4 months, then they will have pulled out their original principal, and everything left is all house money. It's just gaining, and anything they have beyond that is all profit. That's the approach used by quite a few people. I do know of one gentleman, he's invested in 50 to 60 of these, and he pretty much invests in nearly everything he can find. And so that's one approach to take. It does spread the risk across dozens of different projects, so you have a lot of diversification. Another strategy to use is to use the strategy of only investing in the more solid long-term projects. And so you may have your assets spread across just 4 to 6 opportunities, which is a lot easier to manage. The downside to this approach is there is more risk if something does happen to one or two of them that could be a significant part of your portfolio. The third strategy in this you could use is a combination strategy. And essentially this is combining both foundation and others. And this is kind of how I prefer to do mine, where I've got a foundation of solid companies where I have about 60% of my investments. And then I have kind of these mid-range, these in-between companies where I've got about 25% of my money. And then I've got the moonshots, the higher risk, higher reward opportunities. And that's where I've got about 15% of my money. And so I've got a good foundation that I expect to be long-term. And but at the same time, knowing that I have that, I'm willing and able to take a little bit more risk on some of the other higher chance ones in hopes that that pays off. So that kind of talks about what types of projects to invest in. Then within each individual project, how are you going to manage that? And so you can look at each individual project and take a strategy of investing a chunk and then getting a return on investment. And that's actually my preference. When I go into a new project, I'll usually pick an amount. It might be 2 or 5 or 10,000 and just say, I'm going to put that in and then not touch it and just pull out those gains until I've received that original investment back. And so that's one strategy to use. Another one is to put in what I call a floor. So maybe it's 1,000 or 2,000. So maybe it's a little bit smaller amount, but then you let it compound or you make additional contributions to it until it hits a ceiling. And then you convert that to cash flow. So for example, you may have one where you know that your ceiling is going to be 10,000 and you may just put 2 into it now. And then over the next few weeks or few months, maybe you add a little bit more, maybe you compound your gains. But then once you hit that 10,000 level, then you say, hey, that's my ceiling. From now on, I'm just going to pull out all the gains. And so that's another approach you could take with any individual project. And then the last one is you could just put the money in and let it compound. And there are several of these where you can do that. I know they've got long term, and you can really build up some amazing values. However, I don't recommend that one because, again, going back to the first thing I said, these are risky. You have to assume that you're going to lose money in some of these. And if your plan is to build up a bunch of money inside and let it sit there for 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 months before you do anything, then you're going to have a higher risk of having something happen to that project. And so I know some people like the compounding, and when you look at it over a period of 2 or 3 or 5 years, the numbers just get ridiculous. But I don't trust these opportunities enough to use that strategy. So that is a strategy; it's a possibility. Maybe you consider it for a small piece, but those are that's just one of the strategies that some people consider. Again, I prefer to go into an opportunity with a certain amount and then get my return of investment back, and then let it cash flow after that.